The year is 1970. Noel Fellowes is jailed for a murder he didn't commit. Betrayed by justice, this is the story of one man's despair that finally turns to hope.
It must have been about 2 o'clock in the morning. The phone rang and there was a request, an urgent request for a taxi to take a lady to a hospital because she was starting to have a baby, and the husband was really frantic because he thought the baby was coming at any minute, so I had to take them all the way to Lancaster.
Meanwhile, in the village of Overton, the body of a man was found dead in his own home. Harold Parkinson had been burgled and left severely wounded. Tied up with wire, he died from suffocation while trying to escape. At the time of the murder, Noel Fellowes was a young 22-year-old looking for a career. He had tried a job as a policeman, but gave it up after 2 years because he was unhappy with the way they worked. From an office in Preston, Bob Westerdale, formerly crime reporter for the Lancashire Evening Post, picks up the story.
Lancashire police didn't have any suspects, so they started from scratch. Somebody said they'd seen a taxi driver around the area at the time, so some poor officer was obviously detailed to find the name of every taxi driver in a reasonable radius.
And that's really when the nightmare started.
Mr. Parkinson was not only a coin collector, he dabbled in all sorts of weird little areas, and there was a suggestion that he also was a private investigator. All of a sudden they find a notebook in Harold Parkinson's house which bore the name of Noel's mother-in-law.
I was asleep in bed. I'd done a night shift and obviously very tired. The doorbell went and kept going, and nobody seemed to answer it from below.
Noel, undergoing a rather messy divorce at the time, was perhaps a candidate for Mr. Parkinson to be snooping on him. That's what the police thought at the time.
I came downstairs very bleary-eyed and was confronted by 2 detectives who said they wanted to speak to me about the murder of the man in Overton. And then they said they'd like us to go along with them to the memorial hall in Overton, which was their headquarters for this murder inquiry. But I was innocent, so I thought, well, you know, I've got nothing to hide, and that was that. I remember coming through the doors, and as I came through the doors, it's like everybody stopped and looked at me. And this whole room was just full of tables and people, mountains of paperwork, and there were telephones ringing everywhere, and there must have been at least 50 or 60 people in this room. And at that point, I think I really started to get nervous and had a sense of apprehension of why am I here, what am I doing here? And then the detectives weaved me through this room and led me to another room down on the right-hand side. They led me into this room, which was completely different to the main room because this was an empty room except for a table and a few things around. But then I was introduced to the guy who was heading up the investigation, a man called Chief Superintendent John Mounsey, whose claim to fame was he'd arrested and seen convicted the Moors murders, Brady and Hindley, and also the cop killer Sewell, so his fame went before him. For some unknown reason, he started talking about a jacket that my brother lent me for some reason.
I just loaned him the jacket. But what the police did with it is another story.
And I couldn't understand why they were still introducing all these things. And he got more and more aggressive, and I got more and more defensive.
I went down about 11, 12 o'clock at night with my father, and they interrogated us for about 4 hours.
And I'm sort of countering that by saying I thought I was just here just to answer some questions about my statement.
It was like a nightmare, and I'm thinking, well, you know, this is just a story, this isn't real.
I then would thump the table and jump up and shout and then thump the table again, you know, all those sort of intimidating sort of tactics. I got myself in a really emotional state because it's been like a child, you know, you're backed into a corner and there's a brute in front of you and there's no way out, you're trapped.
There was a detective in the corner there. There was one behind me over here and one behind me over there.
And thumping the table, but really violently thumping the table, trying to intimidate you.
I would say I was about 2 minutes from confessing me and Noel did the murder.
I remember just emotion welling up deep inside me, and tears started to appear, and then I started to cry.
And I just couldn't stop crying and crying. I was sobbing my heart out. And if anything, it was like a torture. You know, you've done it, you're the one.
And when he said, you know, that's it, lads, wrap it up, we've got him, I was absolutely stunned, you know. And then he said, handcuff him. I thought, what's he handcuffing me for? And it was like you'd been beaten down to such an extent that you just felt absolutely, you know, hopeless, defenceless. You couldn't believe, you know. They led me outside this door, and Joe Mounsey said words to the effect of, let's wrap it up, we've got him. And as I came out, and I was handcuffed as well, I felt absolutely humiliated because everybody started cheering and clapping, and then I was paraded through all these tables, and people still cheering and clapping, and I just couldn't understand what was going on. And then they led me right through this door at the end at a really slow pace. It seemed like forever to try and get me out of this place. And I could hear the echo of the clapping and the cheering as I walked through the door.
Following his arrest, Noel was taken to the police station in Lancaster, where he was questioned for another 8 or 9 hours before being charged with the murder of Harold Parkinson.
And I went down to see him in the cell at the police station at Morecambe. And they opened this little flap trap door. It wasn't a window, or it wasn't this sort of size, it was a tiny little thing. And all I remember seeing was Noel's eyes look black. He hadn't shaved for 2 or 3 days, and he looked terrible. He didn't look like my brother. He looked like death warmed up. And I think, what have they done to him?
Frightened and confused, he was dragged from his cell and taken to the magistrates' court in Lancaster Castle. Dressed only in a pair of overalls and without socks or shoes, the police hurried him up this flight of stairs to stand before the magistrate.
The reason for that is the police had taken all my clothing for forensic tests and didn't have anything to fit me, so that was my first encounter with the courts, dragged up, handcuffed, and just in bare feet on a cold morning, dragged up these steps to the magistrate's court.
Within minutes, Noel was remanded in custody and sent to Risley Remand Centre to await trial for a murder he had not committed.
They took me to reception and frog marched me into reception, still handcuffed and chained, whereupon I was ordered to be stripped naked because they were going to give me other prison clothes. And then I was locked away in a cubicle, and I was really gripped by fear. I couldn't really understand what was going to happen to me. Then I was ordered into the bath area to take a bath before seeing the doctor, and that's where my worst fears were realised. I was attacked by a number of inmates because somebody told them I was a former policeman, and I went under an awful lot of beating, crying out for help, and they just left me in a heap in the corner. Eventually I was rescued from that and found myself in a hospital wing, and that was my first few hours in prison.
I can still see him now. 29 years later, I can still see his face there through that prison door.
To protect him from the other inmates, Noel spent the next 7 weeks in isolation, waiting for the day of his trial.
But I thought, if I can just survive this, if I can just survive the hostility, that at least when the trial comes along, the truth will emerge. So, this is where they brought me, to Lancaster Castle, the courthouse. This was the morning of the trial. Driven up from Risley, coming to this John o' Gaunt 12th century castle to start the trial.